have kids done that has been funny? I mean, there are funny aspects of family court. At one point I was, and this isn't really what you're looking for, we had a really funny period where when I was working as a guardian ad litem, I was planning Family Court, the musical, and that we were casting all the characters that work in our docket. And I was going to be played by Sean Hayes. I had decided that Sean Hayes would play me. The judge was going to be played by Bette Midler.
Stop wiggling your foot.
Oh, sorry. What has happened in court that was funny?
I like the judges by Bette Midler. Or if she's not available, you can do Katie Segal.
Yes.
Is there a way to keep something like Family Court from being just relentless tragedy?
I mean, there is, because if you do your dependency docket well, there are happy moments, you know, when you either return children to their parents, or when that child comes in for what's called an annual review. You know, if kids wind up in care, some children wind up in foster care and they're too old to be adopted. They're 16 or 17, or they don't want to be adopted. So they're in a foster placement, and then ultimately they go to what's called a PPLA, a permanent plan living arrangement, where they're maybe at apartments that the cabinet maintains near a university where they can go to college. So when that child comes in as a young adult and is in college, and the good thing that we have in this state is if you are a child who has been removed from your home and you're in the care of the state, we will pay for your tuition at a state university. And I always say that to my kids. Look, you get these grades up, you're going to college. This is your way out. So the happy moments are when that child shows up and they're at UK or U of L, and they're planning to go to medical school. I recently had one get into Spalding Nursing School. So it isn't just relentless tragedy. And I think the strength that I bring to, another strength that I bring to the bench, that I bring to the courtroom when I'm in the courtroom, is you got to have a sense of humor. And, you know, the ability to laugh and make people laugh and put people at ease. And that's something my colleagues would tell you I'm very good at, is, you know, coming out with a zinger in the middle of a hearing that sort of relieves some of the levity, because you need that. So that it isn't just relentless tragedy.
Can a judge do that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Judges are allowed to have senses of humor. And that makes it better for everybody, because then the attorneys, if it's a new attorney or an attorney with a, you know, really in a bad spot, can take a deep breath and say, okay, you know, and you remember that they're not going to cut your head off. That everybody does their job, and then we go home.
Is it safe to say, even in the adversarial system that we have in our courts, that everybody is there for the same thing, for what's right, or
No.
Is it no?
It's not safe to say that. Many attorneys are there for many different reasons. There are attorneys who will, and maybe they're the better attorneys than me, who will argue zealously for their client and fight and fight and fight and produce paperwork and do everything they can to obfuscate in a case when they know their client is wrong. You know, there are folks that do that, even when maybe a child is in danger. And there are folks who are in it as long as they're being paid, and only when they're being paid. And then there are people who are there, you know, if they agree to undertake a client and they agree, they believe there's a job that's to be done and it's the right job, who will do the job.
So how do you do this without getting overwhelmingly cynical about human beings?
you wait, you savor the good cases. You find that you enjoy the good parts of people. You have to, because otherwise you would become overly cynical about human beings. You know, there's a facet of the legal system that I believe is well, I can't say that. I shouldn't say that. We're not supposed to take positions on certain things, so I better not. So.
How do the judges and family court work together?
Well, it's a very collegial group. I mean, there's 10 of them, and they have what they call a session, and one of them becomes the chief judge, and they meet regularly to talk about issues before the court and how they're handling things, and if there's a Court of Appeals case, you know, what they think the interpretation of that case is and what the appropriate practice is based on a ruling in a case. And sometimes they disagree, but certainly they have to, you know, if you're going to be out of town, then you have to have coverage for certain dockets. So they work together in that sense to cover for each other to make sure that everybody can take a vacation. And
so there's a lot of chemistry in this of whether it's going to work or not.
Yes, and there are judges, you know, from what I understand up there now, who don't get along. There's always going to be people who don't get along. I mean, I think that's inevitable. I think my strong suit is I'm good at getting along with people. And almost whoever my colleagues are, I'll be able to work well with them.
So having worked so long in family court and knowing all the people, is that going to make it harder to render an objective opinion?
No. I think that you know, no matter who's representing who, when they walk in your courtroom, no attorney is universally going to be advocating a position that you're going to agree with. That it's going to be, you have to look at the facts and you have to decide, you know, who's right and who's wrong. And there's a judge there, or there's an attorney there doing their job, making sure that they put the facts in front of you. And you have to, you know, look, more often than not, it's not that somebody's right and somebody's wrong. It's usually about splitting the what they call splitting the baby. You know, okay, the child needs this schedule so that both parents have some quality parenting time. That's really the typical case. It's a matter of finding a balance. So just because you know the players doesn't mean you can't find a balance. And am I going to have an issue annoying or ticking off an attorney who's my friend? No. I've done that plenty of times in the practice of law.
And in your personal life.
And in my personal life.
You piss me off all the time. So do the cases persist, or is this a discrete period of time you're involved with these
No,
lives?
Well, certain cases persist and certain don't. And it depends on the level of functionality of people. If it's just a couple who's getting a divorce, who things just didn't work out, and they come in once, and they get their divorce, and they're done, and you never see them again, those cases happen. But then some of these, you know, dependency, abuse, neglect cases, you're going to see these kids for 20 years or 15 years. It's going to start out when they're 4 or 5 years old, and you know, the parents are going to make some effort at reunification and fixing whatever issue is creating the problem. But then they're going to be back in 2 years. And it's going to take 8 years for the cabinet to get them out of that house before we finally decide that in spite of all of our reasonable efforts, and that's the federal term, reasonable efforts, you know, we cannot reunify this family. So then it's going to be another year to 2 years for termination of parental rights. Then it might be 3 years before they find an adoptive placement. So you're going to be in these kids' lives for a long time. So it's not necessarily a short duration relationship.
I don't have anything else to talk about.
I think John ought to be here any minute. We can get him done. Let's see if I have